A Russian Federal Security Service captain was found dead at 0400 hours, slumped against the bullet-scarred wall of a Grozny apartment block. His throat was cut ear to ear. A single, chilling message had been left behind. But this wasn't an execution by Chechen rebels. The intelligence suggested it was an inside job. So how did the ambitious, bookish young officer sent to investigate this murder become one of the most feared and enigmatic figures in modern warfare? This is the story of what happened in the shadows of Chechnya. The story of how the crucible of Grozny forged a man named Igor Girkin into the weapon that would one day be known as Strelok. The year was 1995. The city was Grozny. It was not a city anymore. It was an abattoir, a maze of jagged concrete and twisted steel, where life was measured in meters and seconds. For the Russian army, it was a tomb. They had rolled in expecting a swift victory. Instead, they found hell on earth. Every window was a sniper's nest. Every basement was a fortress. The Chechen fighters knew the terrain because it was their home. They moved through sewers and hidden passages, striking like phantoms before melting back into the ruins. The Russian response was medieval. They unleashed a torrent of steel. Thermobaric weapons turned entire city blocks into superheated vacuums. Artillery barrages lasting for days pounded districts into dust. But it didn't break the resistance. It only hardened it. This was not a war of tactics or strategy in the conventional sense. It was a war of attrition, of sheer brutality. It was a place that stripped away ideology and left only the primal instinct to survive, or to kill. Into this meat grinder walked a 24-year-old Igor Vsevolodovich Girkin. He was not a conscript. He was an officer of the FSB, the successor to the KGB. He was a volunteer. While others saw a catastrophic military failure, Girkin saw something else. He saw a holy war, a struggle to reclaim the glory of the Russian Empire he so admired. He was an avid military history reenactor, a man obsessed with the White Army that fought the Bolsheviks. Now, he had stepped out of his fantasy and into a real war, and he would quickly learn that the reality was far more savage than any history book could convey. The chaos of the front lines bred its own kind of corruption. Fear was a currency. So was desperation. Soldiers sold their fuel, their ammunition, even their intelligence to the very people trying to kill them, all for a few rubles or a bottle of vodka. The Russian command structure was hemorrhaging control. This is where Girkin's war truly began. Not on the front line, but behind it. But Girkin wasn't just there to observe. He was a hunter, and his primary targets weren't Chechen warlords hiding in the rubble. His targets were the traitors, the cowards, and the collaborators wearing the same uniform he was. The question wasn't just how to fight the enemy. It was how to purge the rot from within his own ranks. He was assigned to a special counterintelligence directorate of the FSB. Their mission was simple: restore order through fear. They operated outside the normal chain of command. Their authority was absolute, their methods unchecked. When a Russian unit mysteriously lost a dozen men in a perfectly planned ambush, it was Girkin's unit that was sent in to find the leak. They didn't conduct interviews in sterile rooms. They conducted interrogations in blood-stained cellars. There were no military trials. There was no due process. There was only field justice. A soldier would be pulled from his bunk in the middle of the night, a quiet conversation behind a burned-out vehicle. Then, the soldier would simply vanish. He would be listed as missing in action, another nameless casualty swallowed by the fog of war. But his comrades knew. The message was clear. Disloyalty was a death sentence, and the executioners were their own countrymen. Girkin's unit became the immune system of the Russian war machine, a brutal, efficient killer of its own infected cells. This is where the whispers began. Not of a hero, but of an ideologue with ice in his veins, a man who believed so fervently in the cause of the Russian state that he would execute its own sons without a moment's hesitation. He wasn't just fighting a war against the Chechens. He was fighting a war for the soul of Russia itself, and he was willing to commit any sin to win it. He learned a critical lesson in Grozny. Victory doesn't always go to the side with the most firepower. It goes to the side with the most ruthless will. The war shifted. By 1999, the Second Chechen War was raging. The urban warfare of Grozny gave way to a brutal counterinsurgency in the mountains. The enemy was no longer a semi-conventional force defending a city. They were now guerrillas and foreign jihadists who knew every cave and goat path in the Caucasus. Among them was a ghost, a man known as Ibn al-Khattab. A Saudi-born jihadi, Khattab was a charismatic and brutally effective commander. He was a legend, credited with masterminding some of the most devastating ambushes on Russian forces. He was Moscow's #1 target. And while the army threw battalions at his suspected locations, Girkin was tasked with a different kind of hunt. It wasn't about encirclement. It was about infiltration. And the mission that forged the legend of Strelok wasn't going to be one with tanks. It was going to be one with betrayal. Girkin was now attached to a Vimpel unit, the FSB's elite Spetsnaz directorate specializing in covert operations deep behind enemy lines. Their new hunting ground was the Vedeno Gorge, a treacherous region of jagged peaks and dense forests that was Khattab's personal fiefdom. For months, they played a deadly game of cat and mouse. They couldn't trust local informants, who often played both sides. Every patrol was a potential ambush. The air itself felt hostile. They weren't fighting soldiers. They were fighting an idea, a fanatical devotion that drew fighters from across the Arab world to this remote corner of the empire. Girkin studied his enemy. He learned their tactics, their communication methods, their supply routes. He understood that you couldn't kill a ghost with a bullet. You had to give the ghost a reason to materialize. The break came in early 2000. An informant, a trusted courier in Khattab's inner circle, was turned. The price was astronomical, but the intelligence was priceless. Khattab was expecting a shipment of funds and communications equipment. The courier gave Girkin's unit the route, the time, and the exact location of the rendezvous point. It was a perfect trap. A small Spetsnaz team, with Girkin acting as the FSB command element, was inserted by helicopter under the cover of a snowstorm. They moved for 2 days through the frozen wilderness, maintaining absolute radio silence. The cold was a physical enemy, biting at any exposed skin. The tension was suffocating. This was it, the culmination of months of intelligence work. They reached the rendezvous point, a small, isolated hunting cabin, 6 hours early. They set their kill zone. Claymore mines buried in the snow, snipers concealed in the trees, the assault team hidden behind a ridge. All they had to do was wait. The minutes turned into hours. The snow fell harder. The world was reduced to a swirl of white and gray. Every snap of a twig, every gust of wind, sent jolts of adrenaline through the team. Then, at precisely 0200 hours, a signal came from one of the snipers. Movement. 2 figures, then 3, emerging from the woods. But the intelligence was wrong. It wasn't a small courier team. It was a full platoon of hardened fighters. The ghost they were hunting was hunting them. The first rocket-propelled grenade screamed out of the darkness and vaporized the sniper's position. The night erupted. Muzzle flashes lit up the trees from all sides. A 360-degree ambush. The Spetsnaz team was caught in a perfectly prepared crossfire. The informant hadn't just been turned. He had been a double agent from the very beginning. Screams echoed over the radio, then silence. Girkin saw his command element shredded by machine gun fire. They were pinned down, outnumbered at least 5 to 1, and their exfiltration route was cut off. The hunter had become the prey. The crackle of the radio was replaced by the sound of approaching footsteps in the snow, dozens of them. And then, a voice called out in broken Russian, a voice he recognized from intelligence intercepts. It was Khattab's deputy. The trap hadn't been for the ghost. It had been for him. The trap hadn't been for the ghost. It had been for him. But why? Who was he? To the Chechens, he was just another Russian officer. Anonymous. Expendable. Unless he wasn't. The voice called out again, this time with a chilling familiarity. Strelok, we know who you are. Your own people sold you to us. Surrender and you might live. Strelok, his call sign, a name known only to a handful of men within the highest echelons of the FSB. The cold in his bones was suddenly replaced by a glacial dread. This wasn't a double cross. This was a purge. His entire reality tilted on its axis. The Chechen fighters weren't the real enemy here. They were just the tool. The real threat was somewhere in a warm office back in Moscow. Someone had sent him here to die. The question wasn't how to survive the ambush. The question was, who wanted him gone so badly they would sacrifice an entire Spetsnaz team to do it? And what did he know that made him such a liability? Survival was no longer a mission objective. It was a prerequisite for revenge. The disciplined FSB operator died in that moment, and something far more primal took its place. He grabbed the radio from his dead commander. "Granite, this is Strelok," he hissed, using a fallback channel. "Compromised. Betrayed. I'm going dark." He didn't wait for a reply. He smashed the radio against a rock, silencing it forever. He was a ghost now, not just to the enemy, but to his own side. He moved through the chaos with a terrifying clarity. He saw a gap in the enemy's line, a blind spot near a frozen waterfall. It wasn't an escape route. It was a suicide run. He threw his last 2 grenades, not to kill, but to create a screen of snow and confusion. As the Chechens ducked for cover, he broke from his position and sprinted. Bullets ripped through the air around him, snapping branches from the trees. He didn't run away from the fight. He ran towards the one place they wouldn't expect, straight towards the cliff edge behind the waterfall. For a fraction of a second, he was silhouetted against the exploding grenades. A specter, against the fire and snow. Then, without hesitation, he jumped. He plunged into the icy darkness, the roar of the waterfall and the gunfire fading above him. He hit the freezing water below like a slab of concrete, the impact stealing the air from his lungs. The current grabbed him, pulling him under, dragging him through a liquid hell of jagged rocks and suffocating cold. This should have been the end. Drowned or frozen in a desolate gorge, his death a mere footnote in a secret report. But for the man now known only as Strelok, it was a baptism. He was no longer a soldier fighting for a state. He was a man fighting for answers. And his war was just beginning. The sound of the waterfall is deafening as a hand breaks the surface of the black, turbulent water, gasping for air. The image dissolves slowly, the roar of the river morphing into the quiet, electric hum of an expensive air filter. He doesn't turn as a flicker of movement appears in the reflection on the glass. In a deep armchair, shrouded in shadow, sits an older, heavily scarred Strelok. He is gaunt, his face a roadmap of hardship, his eyes like chips of ice. He silently cleans a Makarov pistol. "It took you 20 years, Valorant says, his voice a dry rasp. "I was beginning to think the cold had finished the job." Strelok clicks the magazine into place. The sound is a gunshot in the silent room. "The cold is honest," he replies, his voice gravelly from disuse. "It tries to kill you to your face." "You were a symbol," Valorant continues, taking a sip. "A hero of a bygone era. And heroes have a nasty habit of outliving their usefulness. You believed in the flag, in the mission. The new Russia has different priorities. Less belief, more business." "My men believed," Strelok hisses, taking a step forward. "They died for that flag, while you used them as kindling to keep your office warm. Was it worth it? This view? This glass cage? For the price of a full team of patriots?" "Every single one of them," Valorant says, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "They were your men. Your loyalty to them made you a liability, a stray dog that might one day bite the hand that feeds. We were building a new front, Strelok, not with soldiers, but with oligarchs and oil fields. You simply didn't fit. So you fed the dog to the wolves," Strelok says. The rage is gone, replaced by an empty, chilling calm. Valorant smiles, a ghastly, thin-lipped expression. "Go on then. Be the monster they always said you were. A ghost with one last bullet. Kill me." Nothing changes. The front has already moved on. Strelok lowers the gun. A slow, grim smile touches his own lips. "You're right," he says softly. "The front has moved. I just gave it a new direction." He pulls a small data key from his pocket and tosses it onto the table. "Everything. The orders, the bank transfers, the recordings. It was all sent an hour ago. To everyone." "Your war was for money and power," Strelok says, turning his back on the general. "My war was for answers, and now I have them." He walks towards the service elevator, his silhouette framed by the flashing lights. "You don't get a soldier's death. You get to watch your world burn." He's gone. A ghost who came to collect a debt. Some wars are never declared. Their battlefields are frozen forests and quiet rooms. Their soldiers are ghosts, casualties of a peace they were never allowed to see. They fight on fronts we will never know, breaking lines drawn in ink and blood, all to expose a single, hidden truth. His story is over, but there are 1,000 more just like it, waiting in the shadows. We find those stories. We reveal those truths. We are breaking the front. To make sure you never miss another untold story from the shadows, subscribe to Breaking the Front and hit the bell to be notified when we cross the next line.